Y'all, I want to tell you a story about a fault line. Not the San Andreas. Everybody knows the San Andreas. Not the Cascadia subduction zone. We have talked about that at length on this channel, and it deserves every word of attention it gets. I want to tell you about a fault that runs through the backyards of 2 million people. A fault that passes directly beneath hospitals, schools, football stadiums, and neighborhoods that were built on top of it because the people who built them simply did not know it was there. A fault that the United States Geological Survey has quietly, carefully for years now been calling the most dangerous urban fault in America. Not the most famous, not the biggest, the most dangerous, because of where it runs, because of the cities that sit on top of it, and because of how long it has been since it last moved in any significant way. The Hayward Fault runs through the East Bay of San Francisco, through Oakland, through Berkeley, through Fremont, through Hayward, through San Jose at its southern end. And the last time it produced a major earthquake was 1868, 158 years ago. And this week, after 26 years of unusual quiet in a specific segment of that fault that scientists have been monitoring with particular concern, the ground moved. And scientists are now watching what that movement means. Let me start with the fault itself, because the Hayward Fault is one of those geological features that is hiding in plain sight in a way that I think is genuinely remarkable. If you have ever driven along Interstate 880 through Oakland or Berkeley, if you have been to a game at Oracle Arena, or toured the Berkeley campus, or walked the streets of any of the East Bay cities, you have been on or near the Hayward Fault. The fault runs in a roughly north-south direction along the eastern shore of San Francisco Bay, and it is not a subtle feature if you know what to look for. In Hayward, the street grid is offset along the fault trace. Streets that were built straight appear to kink slightly where the fault crosses them, because decades of slow creep along the fault have shifted the land on either side of it by a few feet, relative to where it was when the streets were laid out. The Memorial Stadium at UC Berkeley, one of the most iconic college athletic venues in America, was built directly astride the fault trace, so precisely along the fault line that the stadium itself has been slowly being pulled apart and rebuilt over the decades as the two sides of the fault move in opposite directions at different rates. The fault is not hidden. It is right there, in the geology and in the engineering and in the slow, almost imperceptible deformation of the urban landscape around it. It is just that most people do not know to look for it. The 1868 Hayward earthquake is not a well-known event outside of the seismological community, and I think that lack of public familiarity is part of what makes the current situation so important to communicate clearly. In 1868, the East Bay was not the densely developed urban landscape it is today. Oakland was a small town. Berkeley did not exist as an incorporated city. Fremont and Hayward were farming communities. The M6.8 earthquake that ruptured the Hayward Fault on October 21, 1868, sometimes called the Great San Francisco Earthquake of 1868, before the 1906 earthquake claimed that title permanently, killed approximately 30 people and caused severe damage across the East Bay communities of the time. 30 people in a sparsely populated agricultural region. The same earthquake striking the same fault in the same location today would be striking a metropolitan area of 2 million people, hundreds of thousands of buildings, critical medical infrastructure, water system infrastructure, and the transportation network that the entire Bay Area depends on. The seismological community has been running scenario exercises for decades on what a repeat of the 1868 earthquake would mean for the modern East Bay. And the numbers they arrive at are humbling. Tens of thousands of displaced residents, hundreds of thousands of buildings damaged, a water system that, in many scenario models, takes months to restore to something approaching full function because the fault crosses almost every major water main in the region. Now here is the specific detail that connects the historical record to what happened this week and why scientists are paying attention. The Hayward Fault has an average recurrence interval, the average time between major earthquakes, of approximately 150 years. The last major earthquake was in 1868. We are now in 2026. We are 158 years past the last major earthquake on a fault with a 150-year average recurrence interval. That number, 158 years, sits 5 years past the average window within which scientists would have historically expected the next major earthquake to occur. The USGS has assessed a 33% probability of a magnitude 6.7 or greater earthquake on the Hayward Fault in the next 30 years, the highest single fault probability in the entire San Francisco Bay Area's fault system. And the specific segment that scientists have been watching most carefully, the segment that has been unusually quiet for 26 years relative to the background microseismicity that characterizes most of the fault's length, moved this week in a way that has the monitoring community taking notice. I want to be very clear about what that movement was, because being honest about the scale of what happened is the most important thing I can do for the people who follow this channel. This was not a major earthquake. It was not a damaging event. Nobody was hurt. Buildings were not cracked. The shaking was felt in the immediate area and produced reports on the USGS "Did you feel it?" system, but did not generate a public emergency response. By the metrics that most people use to evaluate whether an earthquake matters, this event barely registers. A seismograph picked it up. Some people in the immediate area felt it. Life in the East Bay continued without interruption. That is the honest, complete, contextually accurate description of what happened this week. And yet the scientists at the USGS Menlo Park office, the people who have been watching the Hayward fault every single day, who know every square mile of its trace and every year of its microseismic record, who run the computational models of what happens to the fault's stress distribution when any part of it moves, those scientists noticed. Because the segment that moved had been quiet for 26 years, not completely inactive. The Hayward fault is a creeping fault for most of its length, meaning it moves slowly and continuously at a rate of about 4 to 5 millimeters per year, releasing stress gradually rather than saving it all for occasional large ruptures. That creep is normal. It is expected. It is actually, in a counterintuitive way, somewhat reassuring. Fault segments that creep steadily release stress in a way that modestly reduces the energy available for larger earthquakes, at least along the creeping portions. But this particular segment had not been producing the pattern of microseismicity that characterizes a normally creeping fault section. It had been quiet in a way that suggested it was not creeping. And when a fault segment stops creeping, the stress that would have been released gradually is instead accumulating. And this week, for the first time in 26 years, that segment produced an event that the instruments at Menlo Park recorded. Not a major earthquake, but a signal. A break in the silence. And scientists are now trying to determine what that signal means. The broader context for this event is the 2026 Seismic Hazard Assessment for California, which is the most comprehensive scientific picture of what the state faces from its fault systems. That assessment concluded that 16 million people and $3 trillion in building value in California sit in extreme seismic hazard zones, where the peak ground acceleration during a design basis earthquake exceeds 50% of gravitational acceleration. 50% of gravitational acceleration. To put that number in physical terms that most people can relate to, if you weigh 150 pounds, a peak ground acceleration of 50% g would briefly feel as though you weigh 75 pounds in a horizontal direction. For a building, that kind of lateral acceleration applied to its mass is what causes structural failure. 16 million people in California are in zones where that kind of shaking is within the design basis scenario, and the Hayward fault is one of the primary contributors to that hazard for the 2 million people who live along its trace in the East Bay. The research that has been generating the most attention in the seismological community in 2026 adds a specific dimension to the Hayward story that I think is worth understanding clearly. The June 2026 peer-reviewed study by Dr. Liliane Burkhardt and colleagues from the University of Bern, Northern Arizona University, the USGS, and UC San Diego, published in the Journal of Geophysical Research, Solid Earth, found that stress on the San Andreas and San Jacinto fault systems in Southern California has reached its highest level in 1,000 years. Dr. Lucy Jones, the Caltech seismologist who helped develop the benchmark earthquake simulation used for Southern California planning, has described the implications of that finding in terms that deserve plain language amplification. The significance is not simply that the San Andreas is under pressure. It is that the San Jacinto fault, which runs parallel to the San Andreas through the Inland Empire and the Coachella Valley, has reached a stress state where a joint rupture of both faults simultaneously is more physically plausible than at any point in the past millennium. A joint rupture of the San Andreas and the San Jacinto would produce damage along a corridor stretching from the Salton Sea through San Bernardino and Riverside and into the Los Angeles basin. It would affect millions of people. It would sever the I-15 corridor that is the primary water and transportation link for the region. And it would happen on a fault system that is at its highest stress state in 1,000 years. This is the context in which the break in the 26-year silence on the Hayward fault occurred, not in a vacuum, not as an isolated curiosity, but as the latest data point in a picture of California seismic hazard that the scientific community has been building, piece by piece, through 2026, a picture that shows stress accumulating, patterns of microseismicity changing, segments that were quiet beginning to speak, and a research community that is paying closer attention to every signal from every fault in the state than at any point in the history of California seismology. The Shik Alert Early Warning System, California's earthquake early warning infrastructure, currently provides seconds to tens of seconds of warning before strong shaking arrives. Seconds to tens of seconds. That is not a lot of time. But it is enough time if you know what to do with it to dramatically reduce your injury risk. Drop, cover, and hold on the moment the alert sounds. Get under something sturdy. Cover your head and neck. Do not run outside. The most common cause of earthquake injury is people running through doorways and falling debris at building entrances. The alert exists. It works. Sign up for it at earthquake.ca.gov. And if you live in the East Bay, if you live along the Hayward fault trace in Oakland or Berkeley or Hayward or Fremont or San Jose, know that the fault under your feet has been quiet for 26 years in a segment that should not have been that quiet, and that this week it broke that silence. I am not telling you a major earthquake is coming. No honest scientist will tell you that. I am telling you that the most dangerous urban fault in America has a specific segment that just woke up from a 26-year nap, and that the people who live on top of it deserve to know that it happened and to think carefully about whether their earthquake preparedness is where it needs to be. Share this video with everyone you know in the East Bay. The knowledge costs nothing. The preparedness it motivates could be priceless. I love y'all. Stay safe out there.